We are here with Roger Casale. He is the CEO of New Europeans, and we would like to know, Mr. Casale, what is your organization, New Europeans? What are the aims of New Europeans?
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. New Europeans is a pro-European organisation based in Brussels and in London, and we are a civil rights organisation, an award-winning civil rights organisation, and we fight for the rights of EU citizens, especially mobile EU citizens, transnational EU citizens who live and work in another EU member state. But actually, we're also interested in the rights of all people who move in and out of Europe as a whole as well. And we're also interested in the idea of a Europe of the citizens, a Europe of equality and diversity and democracy anchored in human rights. And what we're very busy with at the moment, though, is the campaign for the rights of the 5 million, the 5 million people whose lives have been thrown into limbo by the decision of the UK to leave the European Union, Brexit. That's 3.4 million EU27 citizens from EU27 member states, i.e. not the UK, living in the UK. Yeah. And approximately 1.6 million, we think, British people living in the EU, who still don't know exactly what will happen to them if Brexit goes ahead. And I say if, because maybe it won't go ahead. But if it does go ahead, what will happen with their lives? What will happen in the future? What will happen after Britain leaves? What will happen in a situation where Britain leaves with a deal? Or what will happen where Britain leaves without a deal? And these are all things that are creating uncertainty and anxiety. And we argue that the fact that people have been left in limbo for such a long time represents a violation of their human rights, because it interferes with their right to a personal and a family life.
I see that you brought these green cards. What are these green cards?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a green card from New Europeans.
We are proposing that the status and the rights of the 5 million citizens are ring-fenced by means of a green card for Europe. Now, what we need to do is we need to create a situation after Brexit for the 5 million EU citizens in the UK and Britons in the EU who are already here, which guarantees the same set of rights that they have at the moment, even though they'll be in a new situation. We have to create a similar status for EU citizens in the UK who are already in the UK to the status they have now. At the moment, they have the status of an EU citizen living in another EU member state. And we're saying when Britain is no longer a member of the EU, if Britain leaves, if Britain is no longer a member of the EU, how do you create something that is the equivalent of that? And we're saying you do it by issuing a green card. So what would happen if Britain leaves is that we know that EU citizens in the UK will be given settled status, the right to remain indefinitely in the UK, so long as they don't leave the UK for 5 years or more. And we're saying that that's not enough. They need a green card as well. And we need to give the green card to EU citizens in the UK, and we need to give it to Britons in the EU, because Britons in the EU will get the right to stay in the country of residence where they are at the moment, but they won't get their freedom of movement right back. And the green card will give them to that. So the green card is something you give to EU citizens in the UK and Britons in the EU to give them the same status that they have at the moment. Britons won't be EU citizens anymore, of course, but if they have a green card, they can have a status that is roughly equivalent.
What is the level of acknowledgement of your actions within Europe, not only in Britain, but also elsewhere in Europe?
Well, I'm pleased to say that there's a lot of public support. There's a lot of public support because I think the public in Britain and in the EU recognise that it is fundamentally unfair to have a referendum that has the result of depriving 5 million people of their rights. And that it is a disgrace that people should have been left with this uncertainty for over 2 years, unable to plan their future. And so there is a great consensus that a solution must be found. And this is our proposal for the solution. So I think there's a lot of public support. We have a petition running. We want a green card for Europe that has attracted tens of thousands of signatures. We've now won a number of awards, including Financial Times Award, for the proposal. We have presented the proposal to the Civil Liberties Committee in a public hearing in the European Parliament, and we will be called for another hearing in March in front of the influential Constitutional Affairs Committee of the European Parliament. And so we feel that we are gaining traction on the idea. There's a public support, there's support in the European Parliament. We presented it to the Home Office, who didn't reject it out of hand, who could see the point of it. So we feel that the idea is gaining traction.
What kind of support do you have in Germany, for example? I mean, a big country which is one of the motors of Europe.
We would like to have more support in Germany. There is a German MEP called Jo Leinen, who is very supportive. In fact, we made a card for him. And there is another German MEP who's very influential. Jo Leinen is from the centre-left. And there's another German MP called Elmar Brok, who's from the centre-right, who's very influential, who's also very, very supportive of this, and who's come and spoken at meetings with us about this, and who's on the influential Brexit steering group. So we feel that we have support in Germany, but Germany is very important. We would like more support from Germany, but we've made a good start.
And in Italy?
Yes, in Italy, in Italy too. There's Roberto Gualtieri, who's again an influential member of the European Parliament, who is on the Brexit steering committee, who has been briefed about the idea and who is positive.
Did you have a question?
Excellent. You had a question.
I have a question. Okay. Thank you. Hello, I would have a question to ask about the green card. Would it apply only to people who are already living in the UK, so European citizens who are already living in the UK, or Brits who are already living on the continent? Or would it also apply to people who move to the UK now, or Britons who move to the EU, thus creating a new kind of freedom of movement?
Okay, so that will depend on whether there is a deal or no deal if Britain leaves, firstly, and then it'll depend on other things as well. So assuming Britain leaves with no deal, then this would only apply to people who are already there. If Britain leaves with a deal, there'll be a transition period, and so we say this should apply to anybody who arrives also during the transition period. I think you're also referring to people who would arrive after that in the future. Right, the answer to that is we are not proposing that this should be given to them at the moment because we see this as an answer to an immediate problem that the EU has. The European Parliament has said that it will not sign off the withdrawal agreement unless British people are given their free movement rights back. And we also know that there's not going to be a physical proof of status for EU citizens in the UK, even though they get settled status. So these are problems that arise from the exact arrangements that will be made for Britain leaving the European Union. And so we think that's the opportunity to get the green card adopted as a proposal to deal with those immediate problems. But you know how the way the European Union works. Once it has an instrument to solve one problem, or in our case, this is killing two birds with one stone, it's solving two problems, the problem of EU citizens in the UK and Britain's in the EU. Once the EU has an instrument, like the Green Card for Europe, that can solve one problem or a second problem, it can also use that instrument later. Hello, hi.
Dominic, good to see you.
Hello, very nice to see you. Please come and join us. It can also use that. Later for to solve a different kind of problem. So I would very much. I think that actually a lot of the politicians who are thinking about the green card see it in a very long-term perspective, and I think that's why we haven't got the green card into the withdrawal agreement. I think the green card is seen as something that is to do with the future relationship between the UK and the EU. And the arguments for introducing it for people who are already there are just as strong as they would be for introducing it for people who come in the future. And we know that the problem that Britain is going to have in the future is not too many people coming from the EU to the UK, but too few people coming from the EU to the UK. And therefore, the green card could be something that could be a way of actually encouraging people to come in the future if we find that we've got the opposite problem to the problem we think we've got now. But the answer to your question is this is for people who are here now, who come during the transition period. But the EU could decide in the future, and the UK could decide in the future, to adopt it for a new group of people, which would be people who come in the future. Once they've got the instrument, they can then decide but it would be a separate decision. It's not part of our original proposal. But there'd be no problem with giving it to those people, but that would be a separate decision that probably needs to be taken later. And we're very keen to get this established now. That's why we have quite a minimal ask just for the people who are here now. But yes, we'd love to see it extended to people who, in the future, if they could do it. But we're not asking for that now.
Mm-hmm. So, how adequate did you find the timing and the proposal that the Home Office that did come up with the registration process of those who are Europeans living in the UK, and whether there would be a sum to sign up? And what was your reaction when that first came out? Because that was about a couple of months ago now.
Well, we've been campaigning since actually even before the referendum, and which people find strange, but we could see the problem coming. Mm-hmm. And after the referendum, we've been campaigning for unilateral guarantees. Mm-hmm. Because we said that what happens with EU citizens in the UK and Britons in the EU after the referendum should not be a matter for negotiation between the EU and the UK, because that turns people into bargaining chips. Mm-hmm. The EU should act immediately and unilaterally and give all the guarantees. So in the end, Britain has done that with this settled status scheme that you've just referred to. And it has already started to roll this scheme out. It's making it as simple as it can, it says, to operate. We meet very regularly with the Home Office. Mm-hmm. We're part of a consultation group that was set up at our request, actually, to work with organisations like ours and other organisations, Migrant Voice, Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants. Mm-hmm. There's a group called the 3 Million, and other groups that are all part of this consultation with the Home Office, which was set up at our request. So we're helping to shape the scheme. There's still things that we're not happy about it with, but basically, the important point, the principal point, is that the Home Office are going to do this anyway. The government has said they're going to do this anyway, whether there's a deal or no deal. Yeah. In fact, they're going to do it even if Britain doesn't leave the European Union at all. Not many people know that. Mm-hmm. And you're right, it's a kind of a registration scheme. Mm-hmm. But once you've got people on the scheme and registered, the government is saying they will have the same rights as before, regardless of the negotiations. And we think that's a positive step. We just think it was taken 2 years too late. Mm. Well, not too late, 2 years later than it should have been, because they've done it now. We wanted that, and that's good that they've done it, and it's right that they've done it. They should have done it 2 years ago. Well, they didn't do it 2 years ago. That's just a fact. Yeah. The fact that they didn't do it 2 years ago has left people in this state of uncertainty and distress. Mm. And this is still a very serious problem. And it's damaged community relations in the UK hugely, and trust in the government. And this will take years to repair. Yeah. But the fact that they have now said that they will roll this out unilaterally is in itself a positive thing and what we've been asking for. So we're pleased about that, but you need this as well. Right.
But the one thing that I do think of when I see this is the parallel with the American green card, and how is that inspired from that, because it's such a further restrictive type of process that.
Well, we used the green card rather than blue and yellow card or blue card. First of all, the EU already has a blue card for people coming into the EU from outside, for high earners and high skilled people. So the blue card, colour blue was already taken. But also the green is quite a good provocation, because exactly a lot of European politicians think, why are you calling it a green card? It's like America. We're not America. We're Europe. So we said, well, we don't care what colour you call it. You call it what but it's been a good way of grabbing the attention. Yeah. But we're not fixed on the colour.
So it's a conversation starter.
We'll call it a purple card or a pink card or a yellow card. We don't mind. Yeah. What we want is what it says on the tin. And what it says on the tin is that if you have one of these, you will have the equivalent status to an EU citizen living in another EU member state. It's not a citizenship card, because you can only have EU citizenship if you are a passport holder of an EU member state. Yeah. And British people, after Britain leaves, will no longer be passport holders of an EU member state. But if they have a green card, they will have the equivalent status. So they won't have to change their driving licence if Britain's living in the EU. They won't have to worry about driving across different borders of Europe with their pets in the car because they will have the same, there are all kinds of practical things that people don't think of. Each case is different. The problem with bureaucracies and governments is they tend to think of people as a collective, but of course we're not a collective. We're individuals, and each individual case is different. And so instead of trying to design a kind of system that you can impose on everybody, what you have to do is actually give to each individual something that ring fences their circumstances as they find them now.
And in a scenario where one wants to get a green card in the future, if, say that it would be taken up, how does one, what is the process? What is the...
Fine. Thank you for asking that question. It's such an important question. So what we're saying is that the way you get a green card in our proposal, if you're an EU27 citizen in the UK, first you would apply for settled status from the UK authorities. Once you've got settled status, that will have a registration number. Mm-hmm. You would then go on the Commission website. We're saying the Commission should issue these. And because they've got the blue card, they just need to change the colour in the toner machine and they can issue a green one. I mean, in other words, the Commission is set up for this kind of scheme. Mm-hmm. They don't have an administrative problem issuing these. I mean, there'd be a large number of them. You apply to the Commission, you give your personal details, you give your settled status a registration number, that has to get double checked with the UK authorities, and then you get issued with your green card. If you're a British person in the EU, what do? You will be given, you won't be given a European residence card. There's no such thing. You'll be given that's a different story. You will be given there is something similar, but that's not what they're going to be given. No. They're going to be given a residence card for the member state where they're currently resident. So if you're in France, you'll get a carte de séjour. Yeah. So once you've got your carte de séjour, you go on the Commission website with the number of your carte de séjour, you apply for a green card for Europe, and you're issued with your green card for Europe. Because the problem you'll have if you're a British resident of the EU, if Britain leaves, is that you will have your residency rights guaranteed in France, and of course it's a terrible mess at the moment because we don't know if Britain's leaving with a deal or without a deal, or whether it's leaving at all. And if Britain leaves without a deal, it'll be down to arrangements in each member state.
Exactly. And
all of those arrangements are different. So, for example, the Netherlands are offering British citizens 10 years, and then they'll decide in those 10 years what's going to happen with them next. In Finland, it's 1 year. In Sweden, it's 1 year. In Finland, it's 2 years. So it's a really tricky situation. But the thing is that, ultimately we expect British people to be able to stay in the member state where they currently live and work. But we live in a modern cosmopolitan society where people move around. It's only a small proportion, actually, despite perceptions of British people who are retired in other EU member states. Most British people who are living in other EU member states, I think it's about 70% actually working. Mm-hmm. And the kinds of jobs that many of them do require them to move around the European Union for work, and then they may get moved through their company. Mm-hmm. They may be working in France one day and in Germany the next. Or they may live near a border and live in Germany and work in France. And we have on the back of the card the Europe Bridge in Strasbourg, between Strasbourg and Kehl, over the Rhine, the River Rhine that was fought over. So many wars and so many blood spill. Now you can get on a tram in Kehl and go to Strasbourg like you do from Brussels Midi to Brussels Central. Yeah. It's the same thing. Or from Wimbledon to Earl's Court. It's the same experience. Mm-hmm. But British people won't be able to necessarily work in France and live in Germany unless they have a green card. Mm. So they might be living in Strasbourg and working in Kehl and getting on the tram with everybody else in the morning to go to work, or the other way around, and they won't be able to do it unless they've got a green card. So that's how you would get it, and that's why you would need it.
Thank you.
So, Roger, if I get you right, you think the green card would re-establish some kind of freedom of movement rights for Britons who live in the 27 EU, so it would be valid for all countries.
It would. It would say if you are a British citizen who is already living in the EU, you would get your residency rights if Britain leaves the European Union from the member state where you're living, and that should include your access to healthcare, recognition for your qualifications, many other things as well. But as far as your right to freedom of movement in the European Union is concerned, unless the European Union introduces a green card scheme, you won't have that automatic right. So you would need both things. You would need your carte de séjour from France, if you're living in France, and you would need your green card for Europe from the European Commission. And so it's a huge advantage to British people living in the EU, but it's also an advantage to EU27 citizens in the UK, because the scheme that the British government are introducing in the UK, the settled status scheme, is an online scheme. There's no physical proof of status. So you can imagine the situation of an EU27 citizen in the UK who is going for a job interview or who is trying to rent a flat, and just imagine the conversation they're going to have. And the estate agents might say, well, what's your status here? You say, well, I'm an EU citizen. Yeah, but you're not allowed to stay here anymore. And the person will say, well, yes, I am, because I've got settled status, because I was here before, so I have the right to stay. And the estate agent will say, settled status? What's that? I've never heard of it. What's that called? I say, oh, well, don't worry, I can show it to you. But have you got a mobile phone? I've only got an iPhone, the person says. Oh, well, I'm sorry, it doesn't work on an iPhone. And they'll say, oh, well, go away, the next one. So there's going to be these instances of discrimination against EU27 citizens because of the perception that their status is uncertain. But if they can take a green card out of their pocket and say, I'm a green card holder, then the estate agent or the employer, whoever, go, oh, you're a green card holder. In other words, I know that you're on that side of the line. You're an EU citizen, but you're an EU citizen who was here before Brexit, and therefore there's no question over your status. And, you know, it's often, somebody reported a conversation just like this to me the other day. It was an Italian person living in London. Said, I've been phoned up by my Chinese landlord to ask whether he has to serve me notice because do I still have the right to stay here?
Well, I thought I even saw reports of that, you know, settlement being rejected, even though people have. So that's even more worrying, is that you already see before the process is.
People are worried about that.
You already see reports of, you know, mother of 3 children born in Britain, etc. It was already living there for 20 years and it's already rejected. I don't know how far they go into the truth already, but it's
well, there is an
worrying.
appeal mechanism, and I think that there have been reports of that. I think you need to look at the details of each individual case, and people need to take proper advice. And we're not an organisation that can give immigration advice on individual cases. But certainly the way in which the scheme has been designed, and we are working with the Home Office to try to improve that, should make it as easy as possible. They want to say yes. They're not trying to find a way to say no. I think the old system that they had for indefinite leave to remain was looking for ways to say no. So they were turning down many cases because people wouldn't have the courage or the resources to appeal, and then they would just go away. I think with this, the philosophy is different with this scheme. They are trying to say yes rather than no, and I think that is credible. But I think each case is different, and people need to make sure that they're getting proper advice.
Great.
And what the big problem with it is that it's all online, and there's no physical proof of status once you've got it. And the Home Office have acknowledged to us that they can see that that's a problem in certain situations, and that's why we say we need a green card for Europe.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope it's still running.
To go.